Hello and welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh. And we're here today with Tom Whitmer, who's our, we call him our Natural Resources Director, but the reality is he deals with water. And I thought I'd bring Tom in because even today it's kind of appropriate. In the Verde Independent, they had a story on water and what's known as the Gila River adjudication and the potential impact of that, which I don't think a lot of people realize is out there. And so I thought I'd bring Tom in and talk about what's going on at the state level in terms of water resources, and then get into a discussion about the Gila River adjudication, and then how that may impact us and what we're doing in Cottonwood to kind of prepare for that. So, Tom, what is going on at the state in terms of water resources? And I mean, certainly you hear a lot of concern about it, probably more so how the drought is impacting California and climate change and all of those kind of things. What's happening with water in Arizona statewide?
Amazingly enough, to some you would think nothing. It's just status quo. But in reality, there has been a lot of movement here in the last year and a half, 2 years, with regards to the adjudication in particular. For those of you that have been involved in water for any length of time, realize that the adjudication in the state has been going on since the late 1970s. And that was an effort to try and actually adjudicate the surface water of the state of Arizona within the Gila River system and source, which includes the Verde and the Salt and the San Pedro and the Santa Cruz and some other rivers that are out there. And it, like I said, it's been going on since the late 70s, and to this date they have yet to adjudicate a single basin. Now, having said that, I go back to what I initially said, that there has been some movement here in the recent past. Just in the last year, we've got a new special master to the adjudication court that is actually very knowledgeable and is actually pushing things very hard. And so they've focused on the San Pedro, and the efforts over the last 4 or 5 years have been specifically focused on the San Pedro, simply because they wanted to get one done and under their belts. And there's a lot of issues that they've got to deal with. You know, it's not just the surface water side of the equation, because the courts have already come out and recognize that there is a connection between surface and groundwater, but trying to delineate where that connection is and where it starts has been an ongoing battle in the courts, in the adjudication effort and everything else, and we're getting close to finally resolving that issue down in the San Pedro. There's still a couple issues that need to be resolved before we finally have a decision in order in the San Pedro, but in the meantime, the special master has directed the Department of Water Resources, which is kind of the technical expert to the adjudication court, to begin the effort up here in the Verde. So they've been directed to come up with a final subflow map, which kind of delineates a line parallel to the river that says if your well is located within that zone, you're automatically deemed to be pumping subflow or appropriable groundwater. And that requires a water right in order to do that. And so that effort was preliminarily already done by the Arizona Geological Survey under contract with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and now the Department of Water Resources is trying to incorporate some of the change and tweaks that came out of the effort down in the San Pedro as well. So that effort is underway, and they are moving this direction. You know, the next step in this process would be for them to direct the Department of Water Resources to do a hydrographic survey report, which is an identification of all the wells, all the surface water users, how much, you know, it's a quantification of that effort. So there is movement coming this way. You know, most people have always felt that, well, this will never happen in my lifetime, but with the things that have happened just here in the last 12 to 18 months, I think we may be seeing things up here move very quickly. Quickly, of course, that's relative, because again, in water, nothing really moves really quickly. But in comparison to what's happened over the last 40 years, yeah, I could see things really coming to a head very quickly here.
You know, it kind of brings up just the basic question of who owns the water up here?
Well, in the state of Arizona, we have a bifurcated system, which means we look at surface water and groundwater differently. And for the state, as far as surface water is concerned, you have to have a right in order to divert or capture for use of any surface water source. And surface water is defined as any water flowing within a natural channel. That's key, is the natural channel. So water running off your roof is not considered surface water. Water running down the road is not considered surface water. If it hits a natural drainage channel, you know, a wash, an ephemeral wash, it automatically becomes surface water. And at that point in time, it cannot be captured or diverted without a surface water right. Now, we've got a number of ditch companies up in the Verde Valley that have water rights that are very good rights. And when I say good, that's a term of art in regards to surface water. The use of surface water is based upon the doctrine of prior appropriation, meaning that the person who put the water to beneficial use first has the senior right to the use of that water. And so you look at like Cottonwood Ditch, for instance, over in our neck of the woods. Cottonwood Ditch, their water rights go back to the late 1800s. Which is a very senior right. You know, Salt River Project, we all know about Salt River Project downstream. They have some of their surface water rights go back to the late 1800s as well. Some of them are much later, after 1900, but that puts, you know, our ditch companies, at least many of them, on par with a lot of SRP's most senior rights. And that's critical when it comes to the adjudication, because one of the things they have to do is not only identify who has rights to the use of that water, but also prioritize the date to which that right was put to beneficial use, and also then quantify it. And by doing that, when this thing is all said and done, there will be a system of prioritization, a system of junior senior rights, such that if you're a senior right holder and there isn't sufficient water within the river to, you know, fully fulfill your water right, you can make a call on a junior right holder and say you can no longer take our water. With the adjudication now, realizing and bringing in a lot of these wells into the adjudication, that's going to change things up, because now there could potentially be some well owners that are issued junior rights to the use of that, because they're deemed to be pumping surface water, or at least a portion of surface water, that somebody could make a call on once this thing is all said and done. So it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out at the end of the day. As far as groundwater that is not considered to be appropriate, we work off the doctrine of reasonable use, meaning that if you're a landowner, you have the right to go down and put a well in and withdraw water for the beneficial use of that water on your property. And that's very important. There's been a couple cases that have just come out here recently that I won't get involved with at this point in time. But so if you've got land up here, other than the setback rules related to septic that the county has, you're entitled to put a well in if you so desire to. And there are no groundwater rights in this area that state statute recognizes. The only place we have groundwater rights that are actually issued by the Department of Water Resources are within active management areas. And we currently have 5 active management areas around the state.
And so what is the difference? Because you hear that sometimes, you know, we need an active management area here, you know, and people push for that. You know, what would that mean, and is it realistic?
Well, active management areas were initially focused on those areas where there was some critical groundwater pumping going on, most notably in the major metropolitan areas. There originally in 1980 were 4. It was the Phoenix, the Pinal, the Tucson, and the Prescott active management areas. Those were the areas that were designated as active management areas. And then in the early 1990s, mid-1990s, the folks down in the Nogales area felt that there was a hydrologically based difference between that and the Tucson area itself, so they actually went, and the legislature actually split the Tucson active management areas into 2, creating the Santa Cruz and the Tucson. So we now have 5 active management areas. Active management areas were never designed to protect rivers, ever. the four of the 5 active management areas, their goal is to reach safe yield. And safe yield is nothing more than a determination of water pumped versus water recharged. If you have more water being recharged into the system than what you're pumping, you're considered to be in what is known as safe yield. And that is the goal of 4 of the active management areas. The 5th active management area has a different goal, is the Pinal active management area. And because it was a very large, expansive agricultural area, they didn't want to put it into a safe yield situation because that could have really hampered the economic development within that community, especially because it was agriculturally driven. So they created basically a planned depletion goal for them, meaning that they would manage the resource to the best and most efficient way possible without hindering or hampering the economic development of that area. So they're kind of in a planned depletion zone where everybody else was in the safe yield. Well, if you look at safe yield as basically, water pumped versus water recharged, how does that protect the river? Because it doesn't take into consideration the demands of the river. So active management areas were never designed to protect rivers. It's strictly a groundwater pumping management effort is all it is. That's beneficial to a river to some degree if you really look at it, but active management areas didn't stop pumping. There's still pumping that's going on. What they did is they put in conservation measures for municipalities that are mandated now. They put in different goals for agricultural conservation in those areas where there was agriculture, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of management schemes there that are in place to help manage the groundwater and trying to bring it into a sustainable situation. But realistically, they all have the goal, at least the 4 of safe yield, and they're supposed to reach it by 2024. And most projections show that none of the active management areas will hit safe yield by 2024, which is what their goal is. So does that really help us here? If our goal here is to maintain the river, an active management area isn't going to help us. And if you look at current state statute, if you want to establish a new active management area, it has to be done on an entire groundwater basin. Well, the entire groundwater basin and the Verde groundwater basin extends from Seligman on the northwest, parts of Williams, just up in the park area, Bellevue, Munns Park, part of Payson. It's massive. Yeah. And in order to get it in there, there's only 2 mechanisms for creating it. One is to get it through a vote, which would require 10% of the registered voters in that entire area signing a petition to become an active management area. And then it would go to a vote if you could do that. And the other way is where the director of the Department of Water Resources, if he felt it was critical for the preservation of groundwater, that there was some critical impact that was going to occur as a result of pumping, then he could designate it. But the studies that have been conducted to date indicate that isn't the case, at least in the Verde or the San Pedro, or there was actually 2 efforts in the San Pedro to try and create an active management area, and it was both times shot down. They could never get the registered voters to sign up for it, so the director did the evaluation of the Department of Water Resources did the evaluation, then the director went ahead and made the decision not to designate those as active management areas. So
it doesn't seem like, it'd be very difficult, and a active management area may not really help us anyway.
Well, yeah, it's really important to understand what's really happening here with water use anyways. If you're looking at the Verde Valley, for instance, in the Cottonwood area alone, we've reduced our pumping by almost 30% over the last 18 years. Or at least I should say it's gone down over 30% over the last 18 years. We've only owned the water company since 2006. And we've seen this 30% reduction. We're pumping almost 1,000 acre feet less than what we were doing when we bought the private water companies. Clarkdale has now brought their system, upgraded their system, where they've reduced their pumping down by 20 or 30% as well. They're doing an excellent job. We're actually doing some pretty impressive things without an active management area. As most of rural Arizona in the northern part of the state is doing. And Flagstaff's doing amazing things. You know, our total gallons per capita per daily use, which is one of the lowest in the state, is sitting at 85 gallons. And that's basically total water pumped divided by total population served. And you know, Cottonwood, without an active management area and without conservation mandates, has been able to be one of the tops in the state, as has Flagstaff, as has Payson, you know.
You know, let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about, because we did end up having to get a 100-year water adequacy designation, or whatever they call it. But let's come back and talk about that, but let's take a break right now.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here with Tom Whitmer, who's our Water Resource Manager. And we were talking about active management areas, which we don't have here in the Verde Valley, but we were required to demonstrate that we had a 100-year adequate water supply. What does that mean?
Well, actually, we weren't required to, but the City of Cottonwood, in an effort to actually demonstrate the availability of water for future development, went out and actually filed an application, provided all the hydrological data and the modeling effort in order to demonstrate to the Department of Water Resources that we have an adequate water supply for 100 years. So basically what that means is through all the analysis and evaluations and calculations that we've conducted and provided to the Department of Water Resources, Department of Water Resources has come back and said, based upon all the information we have here, the City of Cottonwood has a designation of approximately X number of thousands of acre feet of water, which is the projected amount of water that the city has identified as being needed at build out. So, and basically what we've done through that effort is to demonstrate that there is sufficient water to meet our demands at build out, and the city has basically reserved that block of water for the city now. Clark followed our suit and did the exact same thing.
Now, and again, that doesn't do anything to address people's concerns about the river. Or,
no.
It's simply there's that much water available.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at all the studies that have been conducted by the Department of Water Resources, by U.S. Geological Survey, by the City of Cottonwood's consultants and in-house, you know, the U.S. Geological Survey has estimated that the amount of water that is recharged naturally here in the Verde Valley is somewhere between about 140,000 and 160,000 acre feet a year. The estimated total pumping in the valley by all users, not just Cottonwood, but Cottonwood, Camp Verde, Cottonwood, the private domestic wells, the agricultural users, is somewhere between 12 and 14,000 acre feet of water. So if you're looking at a safe yield calculation, that would be basically 140,000 minus 12,000, which gives you 128,000 to the good, which means we would be in safe yield for ever. You know, people are concerned that, you know, this area is just going to blow up, and when I say blow up, I mean population-wise, it's going to increase exponentially, and we're just going to have, millions of people here, or at least tens of hundreds of thousands of people here. And if you start looking at it, there isn't a lot of land left to be developed in the city, in the valley here, simply because we're encompassed by the national forest. There's really one last big piece of land, which is about 10 sections over in the Cottonwood area that can be developed. It's state land. So that could be eventually developed. And then there's just a couple of small sections that are out there, and just a couple of them that could be partially developed because you've got some elevation issues in them. And that's it. And when you start realizing that because of the Forest Service surrounding the entire area here, there is going to be a limitation on how big we can actually get. When we did our designation, we took that into consideration and said, okay, how much water do we project we're going to need at build out? And then realistically, that was based upon a number where our gallons per capita per daily use was actually higher than it is today. I mean, our gallons per capita per daily use in 2007 was around 143. Today we're at 85.
And I think that also included those 10 sections of state trust land, as I recall.
It did. So yeah, even though we haven't completed an annexation of those properties, we have at least initiated that process, and it's just not a priority for the state land at this point in time to go ahead and allow that annexation to be finalized. But nevertheless, there's not a lot of land left to be developed in this area, which is good in one part from a water resource standpoint. And if you just start looking at the numbers, though, how much water is being recharged in the basin, how much is being pumped, the likelihood of that river going dry is not going to be because of pumping from people. And there's another component of that water balance that you need to take into consideration that people don't like to hear, but you need to understand it, that people aren't the only pumpers in the valley here. The single largest pumper of groundwater is the riparian forest that encompasses the river. No, we're not promoting the idea of cutting trees down, but when you look at a water balance for the area, or a water budget for the area, you need to recognize that it's not just people that are pumping water. Those trees are pumping more water than people are pumping.
Well, and certainly, I know Friends of the Verde River have been out there trying to take out the invasives.
Oh, great.
Which nobody wants to see in there, which hopefully would also reduce the amount of water use.
It has the potential to do so, unless it's, those areas where they've, pulled out the invasives and if you get a regrowth of sycamore and willow,
right?
Or cottonwood willow, not sycamore, cottonwood and willow. Basically you're just offsetting one pumping by another, which is, that's okay. I mean, at this point in time, but you just need to understand when you start developing a water budget for the area, it's not just people. It's people and the environment. And how do you rank one above the other? I don't think you do.
Yeah.
You need to find that balance so that we can ultimately manage the entire resources such that, we maintain things in a manner such that it's acceptable to all.
Let's go ahead and take another break, and then let's come back and talk about what Cottonwood is doing to prepare for the adjudication. Come back and join us.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh. And again, we're here with Tom Whitmer, who's talking about water. And, excuse me, we were started off talking about the Gila River adjudication and the fact that eventually, and actually, as Tom indicated, it's already coming this way, and it will impact the Verde Valley. And so over the last several years, essentially ever since we purchased the water companies, we've been preparing for the fact that it's coming this way. And I know Tom has been involved in preparing for those possibilities. And so, and obviously the impact is going to be felt through the adjudication in terms of, are we impacting the water rights of SRP and their ability to provide water to their users downstream. I think that's probably a simplified look at it, but so what are we doing to try and shore up our position?
Good question. As I said before, one of the things that comes out of the adjudication is a prioritization of the water rights. Who has the most senior rights, who has the ability to make a call on somebody. There's always, and then there's always the unknown issue of which wells will be considered to be in the adjudication and which ones will be exempt from the adjudication. And because there's always been this thing with, most of the wells have been, have come into play late in the scheme of things. And if you're looking at prioritizations, most of these wells have been drilled long after these surface water right holders have staked their claim to surface water. And there's always been the unknown is, will it ultimately require that all these private domestics and some of the municipalities have to shut their wells off? I don't envision any of the private domestics ever being shut off. That would be a political nightmare for the courts, for SRP, for anybody that was trying to do something along those lines. But there's got to be a solution to the situation. Is
it potentially you end up paying for it? Or?
Well, that's the unknown. And there's been some efforts here of late, some of which I've participated in trying to come up with a solution outside of the court that could then go through the legislative process and then ultimately be blessed by the court as a settlement, so to speak, for the area. And a lot of that's been met with a lot of pushback. Some of the ideas that have come out of those efforts have been kind of ridiculous. But what we're doing is based upon, some of the findings down in the San Pedro, because that's kind of the test case that we're all going to be judged by here, is that initially we felt we were in a pretty good situation with our wells. They were far enough from the initial subflow map, the delineation of the subflow zone, to feel pretty comfortable that we were not going to be part of it. But there's a component of this that they're wrestling with still down in the San Pedro that says, if your well is outside that delineation and your cone of depression overlaps into it when you run that well, you could be deemed to be pumping appropriable subflow and therefore would be required to have a right. Based upon some of the initial findings and initial modeling they did in the San Pedro, it appeared as if most of our wells were going to be pulled into that, the adjudication. And one of the things that we've been doing to try and offset that would be to build a portfolio of credits and also purchase surface water rights so that we have a portfolio that would allow us to continue pumping without any kind of impacts on what we're currently doing right now. In addition to buying surface water rights, we've been on a pathway or a strategy of trying to put back into the ground through recharge our reclaimed water such that we build a portfolio of credits. For every acre foot of water we put back in the ground, we can get a credit for that. And as we build that bank account, so to speak, of credits up, if the adjudication were to come up here and say, okay, out of your 21 wells, 3 of them are in the adjudication, therefore you can only pump those at this amount rather than this amount that you were previously doing, we could use those credits to allow us to continue to pump at the level that we're currently doing, or maybe even exceed or increase what we're currently pumping at because of an increase in demand that may occur or should occur as population increases. Although I have to say, our pumping has gone down as our population has increased over the last 12 years. Which is a credit to what we're doing. So the injection, we've got currently 2 injection wells that we're getting permitted right now, and the permitting that we've already got the DEQ permitting completed. We're now working on the ADWR, or the Department of Water Resources permitting, which is basically a recognition of the quantity of water that we're putting back into the ground, which requires a certain amount of monitoring and metering and hydrologic modeling in order to show that we're actually putting water in the ground and where it's going after it gets into the ground. So those are the things that we're really working on. We really had a concerted effort to try and identify and purchase surface water rights. But that's a difficult task. I mean, there are surface water rights that are here that are available, but oftentimes they're either overpriced, they're at such a ridiculous price because people think it's worth gold, which it's not at this point in time, but someday it may be, or that the right is more of a paper right than an actual physical wet water right, meaning that when you do a severance and transfer of a surface water right from one holder to another person, you have to prove that water up. In other words, you have to actually have demonstrated that that water was actually being put to use, the amount that your water right says. Because oftentimes the water right is actually has a higher number than what the actual physical use is. So when you do that severance and transfer, you've got to prove it up to the Department of Water Resources. And the couple times we've attempted to do that, on paper they had thousands of acre feet, but in actuality it may have just been 100 or so. And of course they were trying to price it based upon the thousands of acre feet.
Yeah.
And that has caused some real problems.
And so the difference would be they were using that 1,000 acre feet back in the early 1900s to water big fields and agriculture, and now half of that area is houses or businesses or roadways, which obviously you're not irrigating the same way.
And there's a court case that goes along with that recently that affects Arizona. That was because it came out of Arizona through the Ninth Circuit Court, which said that, for these old water rights that now have had buildings and roadways on them for the last 50 or 60 years, they've been forfeited, which means now you can't do a severance and transfer of that right. It becomes, just a paper right that's useless at this point in time. But a lot of people have always felt that those were something long-term, we could be using those. Well, the courts now have come out and said, no, those water rights have been forfeited. So that's kind of off the table. So when we look at purchasing, we have to really do our due diligence to make sure that what we're actually getting, if we actually purchase some of these, that it's a wet right.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and the issue of water we can discuss forever. And the saying goes, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And that's probably going to become even more accurate as the adjudication moves up this way. And so if you have any questions, be sure and give us a call. He's an encyclopedia of information on Arizona water, and definitely worthwhile to talk to. And we'd be happy to answer your questions, relieve any concerns hopefully you have. But I think the message that we're trying to get across to you today is this is coming. And as a municipality, we're preparing for that eventuality to make sure that our water supply is safe up here. Again, call us if you have any questions, and come back and join us again on Inside Cottonwood.